Welcome in, and thanks so much for joining me. So in this episode, I'm going to talk about understanding anxiety on 3 different levels. The first level is more the outer level of lifestyle and how that can affect our anxiety in a more helpful way or a more harmful way. The second layer is more an understanding coming from the Vajrayana Buddhist tradition or Tibetan Buddhist tradition of understanding energy movement in the body and how that affects our anxiety. And then the third level is really the innermost level of understanding how we orient to self and identity and our bodies and our place in the world and how all of this also affects anxiety. So the purpose of this video is for those of you who are like me, who struggle with anxiety on a regular basis. And I tend to do content on anxiety often because, it's something I work with in my life in many different ways. And also other people I work with on a regular basis also struggle with it. And I just see it as a common struggle in kind of the modern world, in modern life. A lot of us have to deal with anxiety and what, we might call it chronic anxiety, where it's this continual day-by-day grind. So the outer level is really for all of us, Buddhist, not Buddhist, religious, not religious, whatever. The innermost level is also for everyone. It's a more of a traditional medical perspective on anxiety and how to work with the inner layers of the body and anxiety. And then the third layer is for the Buddhist and the Buddhist curious. So you don't have to be Buddhist to be interested in the third layer. Maybe you're a meditator or you're just interested in what Buddhist psychology and philosophy have to say about it. So you can stay for whatever portion you want, whatever is most useful for you. And of course, I invite you to stay for the whole episode if you want to hear the complete perspective on this. So let's start with the outer layer. This layer sometimes gets looked over as we're trying, especially when we're in the meditation realm or we're applying meditation or we're applying Buddhist philosophy or other psychology or spiritual techniques. And so we tend to think of those sometimes as superior, when actually, if we're not working with the outer layer of chronic anxiety, the inner layer, it's very difficult for the inner layer or the innermost layer to shift things. So the outer layer is our lifestyle. It's what we do day to day. It's our sleep patterns. It's our caffeine intake. It's how we relate to body and thinking mind and emotions. So to start here, I'll start with the outermost, which is, some things that may be obvious for some of you, but I notice for me, even though they're obvious, they're still challenging. For instance, like my, sleep patterns. For me, like regular, consistent sleep is quite difficult. I have a young daughter, so sometimes when we have kids, this becomes more challenging. And even if we don't have kids, we have screens, we have lights, we have activities going on till late at night. And so it's difficult to have a consistent sleep pattern. I'm not an expert in this area, so I'm not going to offer too much on it, but just the kind of notion that getting our sleep life together is really important. When we sleep, obviously our body is able to repair. We're able to work through problems in our dreams and in our sleep. We're able to reset to a certain degree. And connected to the inner layer, what I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, what I've noticed is the energies of my body get a little bit more disturbed when I don't get enough sleep, especially if it's like consistently not enough, where maybe I get one night of good sleep, then 2 or 3 nights of not so great. It really affects my anxiety levels. So that's the first one I wanted to mention. And I'm sure you can find a ton of content on that, or you're already working on that. Related to that is caffeine, obviously, because I love coffee. Mostly I love the taste of it. I don't necessarily always like how it makes me feel. And even if I'm not drinking coffee, I'm drinking tea or something like that. And I have noticed that over a period of time, this does also disrupt my sleep pattern. So, I'm sure some of you got that together. You stop drinking caffeine by a certain hour in the day, before afternoon or something like that. Or you've tried to stop altogether. So these are things that also, of course, affect our sleep, but they affect our anxiety because they're meant to give us energy, but it's kind of artificial energy, right? And so over time, this can throw our system off. It can throw our nervous system off. We can end up either making a chronic anxiety situation worse or creating one, depending on our lifestyle. So that's the second one. The third one, as we get more into the inner layers, we're going from outer to inner, is how we work with our thinking mind throughout the day. Obviously, we're going to relate this to meditation a little bit later. And really, this relates to all three layers of what I'm going to talk about. But the outer layer is just noticing our patterns of basically primarily relying on the thinking mind to solve all of our problems, right? So I don't know about you, but for me personally, this was a problem I didn't notice until it was pointed out, by some of my teachers and just my studies of meditation and the Dharma in general, of just how much, I would attribute it to sort of the education systems I went through. I could say it's sort of cultural to a certain extent, or it's just a modern predicament where we rely much more on the thinking mind. We rely much more on the logical kind of like analytical problem-solving mind. And for some people, they might even think, well, what else is there, right? And so we're going to get there in the inner layer. But on the outer layer, there's the body. There's how we're relating to sensations in the body, how we're relating to moment-by-moment experience in the body. And by body, I mean physical sensations, emotions, of course, and then what we'll talk about in the innermost layer, energies moving through the body. And energies just mean sensations at a more subtle level. So basically, we're talking about the feeling world here. And so one practice I implemented a long time ago when I was living in New York and living kind of a little more stressful, running around, very busy. New York itself is very fast-paced. For those of you who live there or who have lived there, you know what I'm talking about. It's like a very buzzy energy. We also pick up on that. And so we have to really take extra care of this sort of habit to overthink and get out of the body. And instead, we can implement practices of just coming into our feet, integrating walking meditation into our day. For instance, if we have to walk to work or walk around the neighborhood or whatever it is, we deliberately practice mindfulness of steps, like just feeling each foot touching the ground, getting used to that kind of a practice, and more or less start to orient towards being with the sensation or physical sensation in the body versus always needing to be in the thinking mind problem solving. So some of you may not struggle with that, but it's something I struggle with probably my whole life, is sort of this mentality of always sort of what's next, what needs to be solved next. And this is a little bit of a deeper issue because it's connected to like very strong habit patterns and identities around how we feel safe in the world. But either way, on the outer layer is just getting to know that. So it's a little uncomfortable because we have to be willing to see and then admit that we are primarily kind of in the solving, thinking mind, and just giving ourselves a break to come out of that. I think for some people, this is why things like physical asana, yoga practice, like working with the body, dance, any kind of exercise or movement just feels really good and helps us because, when I'm doing like a difficult exercise routine or a long hike or something, there's discomfort in it at a certain point, just because of all the exertion it's taking to continue it. And it's just, I can't think so much. I have to, connect to the feeling in the body and focus on what I'm doing. So for some people, having those more rigorous forms of physical activity help them to come to the body. So if that helps you, by all means. Obviously, that's part of a healthy lifestyle too. So I guess the meditation realm would be more doing that in more gentle ways when we're not necessarily physically active. We could be sitting in a chair and feeling our feet kind of grounding into the earth. I actually share quite a few guided meditations on this. If you go to my website, you can download them. But there's also a lot of meditation sectors on this that you can find. I personally really appreciate it. So the next would be sort of diet and food. And this is starting to also dovetail into the innermost. So we're starting to bridge into that a little bit. But, we have sleep patterns. We have sort of caffeine, which is part of our food intake, right? Drinks. And then we have movement, physical activity, and or how we're relating to the body. And then we have diet. And so, again, I'm not here to like tell you what to eat or not eat. That's not the point. But we do know from the Tibetan medical tradition that there's certain foods that create coldness in the body. And for certain people, when there's coldness in the body, this can create an energy imbalance, which can then result in chronic anxiety, right? And so cold foods, there's obvious ones when they're actually physically cold, like ice cream and things like that. But there's other things you wouldn't think of that are similar, that aren't necessarily cold, but they create coldness in the body. So you have like sugar, anything sort of white breads, anything made with, all that kind of, artificial flour and things like that. Raw food is quite good for us, but we have to be careful because a lot of raw food can create coldness. And so that was an experience I had. I went on some kind of like a salad-based diet and eating just very low calorie at some point. And I felt great. I was shedding weight and feeling quite healthy. But my lung problem, lung is coming in a moment. The Tibetan word lung, I'm already introducing it. Lung is the Tibetan word for the energy, the wind energy in our body, which we'll get into in a moment. What I noticed is my anxiety went up. Not right away. It took like a few weeks because I was mostly eating raw food. Now, again, for some of you, you may be raw foodists or whatever, and you do quite fine. I don't know. So this isn't always universal. It can be individual as well. So yeah, there's ways to figure this out. But typically raw things, cold foods, too much sugar, too much flour kind of based stuff. We can see this is sort of the root of a lot of our diets in the modern world. Artificial foods, all of that. So again, I don't want to say too much. This is something you need to kind of play with and figure out. But these things actually can be hidden factors in increasing chronic anxiety and or making it more difficult for us to work with it. So there's more to say about this outer layer because kind of, lifestyle is large and we all have different kinds of lifestyles. And so I just encourage you to do some deeper dives into what you're doing, how you're using your body and mind throughout the day. And we can be critical in a healthy way where we're not looking to find the perfect diet or the perfect way to be or the perfect sleep. It's just more being aware and noticing what kinds of behaviors, what kinds of ways of life, sleeping, eating, etc., what helps us and what hurts us. So, that's how I'll wrap up this section. It's just encouraging you to put more energy into that as a way to understand anxiety and sort of how you're working with it. So now we have the innermost layer. And so obviously meditation comes in here. Now we have the inner layer. So that was the outer layer. Now we have the inner layer. So the inner layer, in the Vajrayana systems of Tibetan Buddhism, which pull from traditional medicines, like Tibetan medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, obviously there's Chinese medicine, those all come from a similar source. And they all have lots of science on understanding a layer of the body that sits between the physical body and the mind. So generally in the Buddhist traditions, the mind is not something material. So the mind is not brain, though the brain plays a large part as a muscle helping our mind to connect to this human world. So we see the brain more as a muscle. And so that doesn't mean, the brain isn't important or anything like that. It's very important, but it's not primary. The mind, which is immaterial, is primary. And also this subtle body, or energy body I'm referring to, is also primary because that's the bridge of what intersects between mind and body. This is why when we feel a strong emotion, we not only have thoughts and images and states of mind related to it, we also have physical feeling related to it. Because the subtle body is connected to emotion, it's connected to how it gets expressed in the physical body as either healthy or unhealthy. And of course, it affects mind. So these are not necessarily like linear processes. They're more like circular or a spiral of things that are affecting each other. They're more like relationships. But I really like this approach for those of us who haven't studied traditional medical science that much. I like this approach of thinking of the subtle body or the energy body as a bridge between the physical body and the mind. So basically a bridge between the material and the immaterial. So when we start to understand this inner layer of what could be influencing our anxiety, what we have to look at is three qualities of this energy body that are can be in balance or out of balance. And these three qualities, in English, we call them the wind energy, which I already named, the channels, and the essential drops or drops. In Tibetan, they call them sa, for the channels, lung for the wind energy, and tigle for the essential drops. There's also Sanskrit names as well, but the names are less important than actually knowing what it is. And in traditional medicine, traditional Tibetan medicine, traditional Ayurvedic medicine, etc., they work with reading the subtle body through pulse diagnosis, not pulse like the heart pulse, but they can feel the pulse of the wind energy and the channels, and they can, a good doctor who's trained in it can start to see what's going on with different organs as well as what's going on with the energy around these organs, including the wind energy. And so basically the wind energy is fundamental. We're not going to talk about too much about the channels and drops, though those are important drops. The essential drops are more related to mind on the level of energy. The channels are like the highways or roads that the mind as energy moves through the body. And then we have the wind energy, which is the actual energy of movement. So the energy of movement, it doesn't have like a volition necessarily, but it can form habit patterns based on our lifestyle, like I talked earlier, based on our physical body makeup, and based on how we use the mind and work with the mind. And so typically what's happening in this inner layer is the wind energy or the lung can get an imbalance, and there's different types of lung throughout the body. I'm not here to give like a class in Tibetan medicine. I'm not a Tibetan doctor. I work with it more as a practitioner, and then when I need a Tibetan doctor, I work with a Tibetan doctor as a patient. And then I work more as a meditator, as a practitioner, in the sense of learning the patterns of how my mind and body respond, what it feels like to have the wind energy up, which usually for me results in kind of my nervous system being more activated, anxiety being more present, difficulty sleeping, sometimes pressure in different parts of the body, etc. So these are all signs of the lung being imbalanced. And in particular, in the modern world, we tend to get an imbalance of what's called the upward moving wind. It's the wind that's in charge of movement in this part of the body. And the imbalance results in just too much wind pushing mind and emotion around in that area. And also the energy itself gets blocked and stagnates and can create dis-ease both in our minds, emotions, and eventually in our physical body, where we can actually get different kinds of physical ailments. So again, like I said, I'm not going into too deep of a dive here, But the main way we become aware of this is both through noticing, again, these patterns of if we have nervousness, if we have anxiety, if we suffer from various sleep problems, it's most likely we have some kind of a wind energy imbalance. And there's nothing wrong with you. I guess I could say, like, welcome to the modern world. Most of us have some kind of a energy imbalance, at least in the modern Western world. And we can seek help. We can seek out Tibetan medical clinics, Ayurvedic clinics. Ayurveda would be the medicine coming from India. And also Chinese doctors use acupuncture and herbs. They treat similar disorders. So, pretty much these things have found their way into most places. So unless you're really in the middle of nowhere somewhere, you're probably going to be able to find somebody who can help you from the medical perspective, from traditional medicine. From the meditation perspective, we need to work with breath, right? So I did some content on this recently, so you can go back to that content. I think it was the video on the guided meditation on grounding, and also the video on grounding. I also have some content on healing anxiety, where I go through a breath practice. And not all breath practice helps, but most breath practice does, because when we connect to the breath consciously and we manipulate it to a certain degree, especially slowing it down, it actually can affect the wind energy in, I guess we could say, like, righting an imbalance. So typically, as I shared recently in some content, belly breathing is really helpful. Breathing in out of the nose, breathing into the lower belly, and breathing out. Just doing that for 10 minutes a day can start to change the habit patterns in the energy body. For some of us, we need more than that. So we need more than 10 minutes and or working with a traditional doctor. And also these lifestyle changes I was talking about. But in general, in the realm of meditation, this would help, these kinds of breath practices, especially for the upward moving wind, bringing the breath into the belly. Sometimes we hold it gently there. And other than that, general practice of awareness, what we call shamatha or calm abiding meditation, also really helps, because what we're doing when we're working with calm abiding meditation or meditative awareness is we're learning to train the attention and mind to be in the present moment and to basically rest there. And again, some people get confused thinking they have to get rid of their thoughts or things like that. And of course, we know overthinking contributes to our chronic anxiety, but thinking is also really helpful. So it's just knowing when we need to use the thinking mind and when we can let it rest. And the problem a lot of us have is, even if we want to put it to rest, we can't. And so then sometimes we seek meditation as a way to sort of conquer the thinking mind or get rid of thoughts. And I generally don't advise that, because it's not necessary. Instead, we just have to understand what is healthy thinking, like what's a healthy form of it, what's healthy levels of it. And when we don't need to think, can we, how do you say that? It's not quite control that, but can we limit that? Or is our habit pattern kind of controlling us, right? And so if we notice it's controlling us, we need to spend a little bit more time on shamatha or meditative awareness practice. In Buddhism, we use this as a preliminary for the deeper practices of what we're going to talk about in the innermost layer of this topic today. But either way, shamatha becomes a way to both settle the mind into the present moment, and it naturally settles the wind energy. So it has this relationship to the energy body layer. So in Tibetan Buddhism, we can work with the lung or wind energy through the breath or through the means of more Vajrayana technology of understanding the energy body, manipulating it in a constructive way for health and for further Dharma realization. And of course, it can have a similar effect to working with meditative awareness. So most practitioners practicing Buddhism in the Tibetan traditions will do both. They'll work with settling the mind and training the mind in resting in the present moment and connecting to awareness. And they may use pranayama or breath practices to enhance that or help that. So I know for me, this was really key, where I was struggling a lot with shamatha early on as a monk. And I mean, I still struggle with it, but less than I did back then. And I was struggling with it mainly because I just couldn't settle. It was just sort of, my body was really activated, really anxious. My thinking mind was just all over the place. And I just felt like I was fighting the thinking mind all the time. And when I was introduced to some breathing techniques, like similar to what I already shared here, and started putting energy into that, I realized, oh, if I can settle the wind energy a little bit, actually, I don't have to fight anything. I can just sort of naturally rest in awareness a little bit easier. Of course, not like to the degree we're being asked to in Buddhist teachings, but better than I could. And that was really helpful. Then I can actually start the training and work with the training in shamatha. So for some people, that's often what I recommend to them, is if they're really struggling with meditation, it's not really, they don't need to necessarily meditate more, although that can be helpful. They need to work with the energy body. They need to work with the wind energy and rebalancing that, settling that through either meditation or traditional medicine or breathing techniques, whatever. So yeah, so that's this that's this inner layer, right? So we talked about the outer lifestyle, inner, working with the lifestyle of sort of the nervous system and what we call the subtle body or energy body in traditional medicines and also Vajrayana Buddhism. And then we have the innermost layer, which connects to Buddhism in general. This isn't just a Tibetan Buddhist, Himalayan Buddhist thing. It's not just a Vajrayana thing. This is a Buddhist thing of more or less when we are clinging to a permanent independent self, we are going to experience anxiety because that self is going to have aversion to certain things. It's going to have attachment to certain things. And mostly that self is going to function within two modes, either fear, which is kind of a form of aversion, or expectation, which is a form of attachment. So fear or expectation. Sometimes we say hope instead of expectation, but I think expectation is a clearer term. So fear and expectation. So this is the deeper Dharma dive here. So some of you haven't studied the aspects of shunyata or not self or emptiness in Buddhism. This might seem kind of foreign, but nonetheless, with more familiarity, study of the Dharma, some teachings, practice, you can get more familiar with it. And it's very helpful. Because if we're able to tackle this more fundamental layer, which also leads to liberation and awakening in Buddhism eventually, if we're able to work with it, actually we're able to also help our anxiety. So it does have a practical function. In Buddhism, we don't necessarily use it so much with that motivation. Our motivation is we want to benefit others, and therefore we want to become more awake to our experience of dissatisfaction and to have some understanding and insight into that in order to become free. And then we can become more, we can serve others better, more clearly. We can serve others more fully because we know how to remedy dissatisfaction and suffering. So that's really the point of these particular teachings. But of course, they have the side effects of helping anxiety because if we realize that we don't have to cling to ourselves in the way we're clinging to ourselves, we don't have to cling to our views, ideas, opinions of ourselves and the world of others around us so strongly, we can instead develop a more flexible and fluid way of working in the world, including embodying more compassion around that for ourselves and others. Then we can relax to a certain degree. I think about this often. Why is the Buddha such a universal symbol, like a Buddha statue, an image of the Buddha, a picture, etc.? Why is it such a universal image of peace. Now, I'm not saying that's the case all the time, but generally, I think most people see a Buddha statue as peaceful. And, of course, the Buddha is depicted as peaceful. And so we have to think about it sometimes, like, why is the Buddha peaceful? Is the Buddha peaceful because he found some state that is sort of the ultimate peace, or took some pill, or, I don't know, found the perfect meditation technique? We wouldn't really say that in Buddhism. What we'd say is the Buddha's peaceful because he stopped clinging to an independent self. He stopped clinging to ideas, beliefs, opinions, and thoughts as real. Now, some people get confused here where they say, well, then nothing's real. Not quite that. This topic is pretty nuanced in Buddhism. I usually refer to this as like the Buddhist non-duality department. And it's a challenging department because it's not saying things don't exist. It's just saying they don't exist in the way they appear necessarily. Or we're kind of having an overlay on top of reality of our own kind of individual reality. And what happens when we cling to that individual reality is that we then have, like I said, fear and expectation, attachment and aversion around that, which creates, bingo, anxiety, right? And not only anxiety, we act out harmful conduct out of that, right? We can hurt ourselves, we can hurt others, etc. So at the end of the day, the Buddhist teaching, the teachings on Buddhist non-duality are quite simple, meaning like if we know the purpose and we don't lose the plot, we can use them in a healthy way. It's not to kind of come into some nothingness where everything disappears. That's pretty useless, actually, in my opinion. Instead, it's to come into fluidity and openness where compassion can really come out and unfold. And, on like a very practical level, we just don't take ourselves that seriously, in the sense that we don't take our thoughts and emotions so seriously, and we can work with them, right? And just imagine that. Imagine being able to work with your thoughts and emotions with more playfulness, with more ease, with more flexibility. Just that in itself, we're not even talking about enlightenment, that in itself creates so much more peace. I know for me, I'm generally more activated by my emotions and thoughts, but because of my training in the Buddhist path, there's moments where I get a little bit of flexibility within them. And it's so liberating. And I notice it really affects my anxiety. It goes down because there's nothing to protect. There's nothing to fear in that moment. There's nothing to try to get or expect. So fundamentally, I think this is really the how do you say it? Like the core reason to practice Buddhism. And I'm not I'm not making this video to turn those of you who aren't into Buddhism into Buddhists. I think it's less important that we're Buddhist. I think it's more important we engage the Dharma, which frees us and creates more flexibility. If you want to be Buddhist, great, but it's the point is to discover these deeper layers of what is causing our dissatisfaction. And probably for most of us, as having to navigate human life, there's just so many reasons to have anxiety. Just even the truth that all of us, once we're born, we're going to have to die. That in itself is a huge anxiety that, there's no material thing that can eliminate that for you or me. That's just there. But what I've noticed is the Dharma can give us frameworks to find a different way to look at that, and therefore to find a kind of peace that's not a state and not a way of being, right? It's just because we know something, we know the secret to life, we can have more peace. So I'll kind of end on that note. Some people can take this as bad news. I personally don't. But, life itself is anxiety causing. And to some degree, we just have to accept that. And we can work with that, right? That's what I'm saying. Through the Buddhist path, through these teachings, it's something we can work with. It's something we can remedy. We can find these other ways to work with more fluidity, compassion, flexibility for our emotions and thoughts. And of course, others. So I'll end it there. Thanks so much. I really appreciate you listening in if you've stayed with me this long. And please let me know if this is helpful for you. I'd love to make more content on this. happy to go into any of these layers in more detail. And otherwise, wish you lots of luck in your journey of working with your anxiety in a more healthy way. Thanks so much.